The World Health Organization says the spread of the H1N1 virus has become a global pandemic and is now unstoppable. Scary stuff, but there's little evidence of it on the streets as life seemingly goes on as normal. Is the threat as serious as it sounds, or has it been exaggerated by the media and pharmaceutical companies? Are we ready to confront it? This is Inside Story. Hello and a very big welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. The spread of swine flu is unstoppable. That is now the latest warning from the World Health Organization and comes after the WHO raised the pandemic alert from 5 to 6 just last month. Governments across the world have been stepping up precautions against its spread since the first confirmed case in Mexico in late April. About the same time, the US and Canada confirmed their first cases. Within a week, Spain said it had its first swine flu case in Europe. And Israel confirmed the first case in the Middle East. In less than a month's time, like wildfire, the virus spread across the world. The latest WHO report confirms nearly 90,000 cases in 125 countries, with 382 dead. Joining us now are our guests in Edinburgh, Ian Schofield. He's a principal analyst at Scrip World Pharmaceutical News. In Brussels, Deborah Mackenzie. She's the European correspondent for New Scientist magazine. And in Cairo, Nasser Eldin Tantoy. He's a medical epidemiologist at the World Health Organization. Thank you all three very much for joining us. The WHO says it's unstoppable, 382 people dead. Is it really unstoppable, Mr. Tantoy? Are these not just scare tactics that are totally unacceptable?
Well, I believe that the current situation, I would say yes, because the disease is being transmitted now from person to person, and the traveling of persons from place to place has covered the whole world now. And by definition, phase 6 means that there is sustained community transmission in more than one country, in more than one WHO region, and this is what's happening now. As long as we cannot stop traveling, and this is not advisable, of course, or trade, then the disease is being transmitted geographically very extensively. But thanks God that the disease is very mild, and I believe that now the only option for the whole world is to mitigate the effects of this transmission rather than stopping it.
But the language that the WHO uses is not mild, unstoppable. I mean, a poll in New York City this week suggested that hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers have had H1N1, but only 0.1% needed hospitalization. So are these fear tactics really that necessary?
Well, I believe that, as I said, that it is very fortunate that that disease, although it is spreading very widely, but it is very mild, and even many of these cases have recovered without even taking the antiviral. So we do not like to create panic, at least at the time being, but let me say that we should not be very complacent, because influenza viruses are changing sometimes, or most of the times, and they are known for this kind of mutative changes. And we should be monitoring the evolution of this pandemic and any changes in the genetics or the antiviral drug resistance. So I believe that we stay in the middle, that we are observing, we are monitoring the evolution of this pandemic. Cases are occurring, they are very mild, easily recovered, but we'll be monitoring to see whether there will be some changes that will deserve sharing of new information by WHO to all member states in the world. Okay,
Mr. Mackenzie, I believe that you feel that panic is necessary when you're dealing with this H1N1 virus, that some sort of flu tsunami is on its way.
Panic is never necessary, but concern is necessary. I mean, you're talking about scare tactics. Well, if there is something happening that we should be scared about, how can you call a sensible warning anything other than scare tactics? We should be scared of this virus. It is not killing a huge number of people yet, but we know that flu pandemics tend to get worse.
And
we
is this one going to get
with
worse?
Any certainty what this virus will do? Probably. Because that's what flu pandemics have done in the past. We cannot say 100% because this is a flu virus, and flu is an extremely complex little beast, and it does unpredictable things. That's one of the reasons it's scary. We don't know what it's going to do next. But we do know that flu pandemics in the past have had successive waves that were worse.
Mr. Schofield, what is the view from the pharmaceutical companies? Where do they fit into this puzzle?
Well, the pharmaceutical companies are just finishing off the production of seasonal flu viruses. And seasonal flu virus is very different from the pandemic strain. From now on, they've already received the virus strains from the World Health Organization, and they're now working to produce vaccines against the new virus. Because of the time of the procedures involved in producing a vaccine, it's unlikely that one will be ready for use before September or October at the earliest.
Okay, Mr. Tantawi, let's get back to you now. I'm trying to reconcile this language that is being used by the WHO, this warning, not as Ms. Mackenzie said, the fear tactics, but rather warning, which should be heeded. How come this is not played out on the streets? Everywhere you go, you see that the masks have gone. Apparently something like 1.6 million people applied to go to Michael Jackson's funeral. So people are no longer as frightened as they used to be. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I believe that is true. And I believe also that we are having more knowledge now, and people always remember the 3 previous pandemics in the 20th century, and especially the dreadful impact of 1918. And they know from history also that the first wave comes mild and then seconded by a more drastic one. So I believe that fear could be explained very well when we understand this. But the standpoint of WHO is masks, for example, that we believe that those who should wear the mask are the transmitters of the disease rather than the public. And,
because there were calls a couple of weeks ago, to cancel the Hajj, and you saying that this disease can spread so quickly, it's now going to go ahead. Do you think that's irresponsible?
Well, I believe that the current situation regarding the spread of H1N1 in the Middle East, it does not support the idea of stopping traveling, including Hajj and Umrah. But I believe that the meeting has come up with a conclusion that at the time being, people can travel except the high-risk groups like the very old and those with immune suppression conditions, and pregnant ladies, of course, should not travel because they are at high risk of complications. But at the same time, I believe that the current situation, the spread of the virus is not very alarming in the Middle East. And the WHO in its meeting in Jeddah recommended that this kind of recommendation could be revised based on any new information whenever it accumulates.
Okay, Mr. Schofield, is what we're seeing at the moment, is it all about cash? This virus that is flooding through the world needs to be stopped. Step in, pharmaceutical companies.
Well, basically, the pharmaceutical companies have a responsibility to produce the vaccine that they're asked for by the WHO. As I said, they've finished the seasonal production and they're now moving into production of the pandemic vaccine. They can only work along the processes that they have and the capacity that they have for producing vaccines. So, as I said before, taking into account the processes that they have to go through, including growing the virus, producing the vaccine and testing it in animals and in limited trials in humans. This all takes time, so they will not have the vaccine ready before October, and after that it will depend very much on how strong the vaccine is, how well it induces an immune response in humans, and the actual dose needed to determine how much of the vaccine they will be able to produce to meet global demand.
Okay, because at this stage, a drug commonly used to treat flu called Tamiflu is fairly effective at treating the H1N1 infection. A possible shortage in the availability of Tamiflu and an opportunity to capitalize on the swine flu scare has pushed many countries to look for cheaper generic alternative. Anti-flu is one such example, produced by an Indian company. It was approved by the WHO in May. It has been certified to be as effective as Tamiflu and is included in the WHO list of pre-qualified medicinal products. Meanwhile, Vietnam is also looking into the possibility of making a key material required for the production of Tamiflu out of anisay, a small tree grown locally. And Tantoy, do you worry about the impact of these generic drugs? I mean, could this ultimately have repercussions that go far beyond the immediate crisis?
I'm really sorry. Can you repeat it again, please?
Are you concerned about the impact of these generic drugs? I mean, could they have an impact that goes far beyond what we're seeing at the moment?
No, I do not have any fear about this. I believe that WHO has worked with some countries, in developing countries like India, and give this kind of patency right to produce the antivirals. And I believe that we have now good technology, we have better capacity for production, and I believe that WHO also can work on giving the same patency right to other countries to produce more antivirals. And again, I believe that this kind of products are being monitored.
Okay, Mr. McKenzie, does any of these make, or do any of these make any scientific sense to you?
Well, you seem to be exploring the idea that possibly this whole crisis is being blown out of proportion in order for drug companies to make money.
We certainly got to entertain
they declared an emergency in Buenos Aires last
one
week.
of many conspiracy theories.
Well, okay, let me just point this out. The health minister in Argentina resigned last week. They're running out of hospital beds. They don't think there's no sign of it on the streets. They've got people dying. Let us point out that the straight numbers, the apparent 0.1% hospitalization rate in New York, yes, it's very mild, but flu doesn't normally kill 3-year-olds. It doesn't normally kill 20-year-olds. It doesn't normally kill 40-year-olds. It's doing that now. You know, 9-year-olds who were healthy on Friday are dead on Sunday. That doesn't normally happen with flu, and
okay,
it's
well, that's
happening
what
with
I'm
this
trying
virus
to analyze.
now.
I mean, if
the
it
thing
is as bad,
it could do more of that.
Sorry, excuse me, interrupting. If it is as bad as you say it is,
Sorry.
how come we don't know about it?
But we do. People have been warning us about it, and
but where's
that's
the evidence
very
on the
warnings
streets?
that some people are worried are scare tactics. Sorry?
Where's the evidence on the streets? A point that we made a little bit earlier. Why is this not having the impact that it should have? If we are to be as worried about it as you say we should.
I'm not saying people should be so worried about it that you can actually see, you know, people rioting and worrying on the streets. I'm saying that we should be warned about it to the extent that governments take action, which they should be taking now, which is to make plans, which is to tell people that possibly they may have to prepare for a long period of school closure in the fall. Maybe they should even stock up some food and water, as the pandemic plan in some countries calls for. That's not scare tactics. That's reasonable preparations, given what this thing might do. Now, if it all fizzles out, a lot of scientists will be surprised, but it could still do that. And then I suppose there will be those who say we all did it so that we could sell vaccine. But, you know, who's we? The scientists of the world don't stand to profit from this.
Can you paint us a
picture
of what it might do?
Well, okay, let's go back, as many people do, to 1918. That was at a time when people were accustomed to having infectious diseases that just ripped through neighborhoods and killed young people. We've lost that habit, except for many parts of the world which sadly do not have modern medical care. But in many parts of the world, we've forgotten what that's like. The 1918 pandemic killed more people than World War I. You know, it was a lot of people. You might not have seen much evidence of it on the street at the time, because people don't die of the flu in the street. They go home to do it. But, you know, that was still an awful lot of dying going on right in the wake of a major war, and yet it was even worse. I think if that happened now on a planet with a 24-hour news schedule, thanks to people like you, and me, we would probably get a lot more alarm. We'll probably have a lot more, perhaps even civil unrest, due to the fact that a lot of people are dying, and drugs and vaccines are not going to be widely available in time unless we're very lucky.
Okay, because several countries have issued precautionary advisories, non-pharmaceutical in nature, to stop the spread of the virus, emphasizing on personal hygiene. It includes simple measures like wash your hands regularly or thoroughly, cover your nose and mouth when you cough or sneeze, avoid touching your eyes, nose or mouth with your hands. If you are sick, avoid crowded areas and wear a surgical mask. Seek treatment early if you have flu-like symptoms, and if you've recently traveled to areas with cases of swine flu infection. Avoid close contact with people who may be ill. Mr. Schofield, let's pick up on that point. Wash your hands often and thoroughly. I mean, how do you get somebody to do that in a poor country where there is no clean water, if they have any water at all?
It's not really my area of expertise, but obviously that is a very big problem. The spread of the virus in the developing world is one of the very big worries. In the developed countries, governments have supplies of antivirals and will have supplies of vaccines. Some pharmaceutical companies have donated stores of antivirals to the WHO, which has in turn distributed them to some of the developing countries that will need them. As for hygiene, obviously it is a very difficult problem in developing countries, which is why they're particularly affected by any major disease that spreads very quickly from person to person.
Okay, so maybe Mr. Tantoy, do you think that it's now time for the international community to get more involved in developing world countries if they don't have access to the basics?
Yeah, I believe
because surely, sorry, that is the
maybe
area that this is going to spread the fastest. So something needs to be done, tackled at that point.
Absolutely. I believe that looking at this disease, which is transmitted by droplet infection, which is kind of respiratory infection at very close distance, less than 1 meter, and by contact. So kind of, I know that washing hands, if there is no facility, for example, washing hands is not the only way of avoiding infection. We should not forget that we can advise the people at different situations with different things. I believe that if somebody tried to avoid crowdedness, if somebody tried to avoid contact with people with manifestations of common cold, if he does not touch his mouth and nose after touching a potentially spoiled surface or shaking hand with somebody with manifestations, I believe communication here is an essential part of any preparedness plan to mitigate the effect of this pandemic. And from what I know from our region at EMRO, communication plan has been addressed in all pandemic preparedness plans in the Middle East. I don't know how this will be implemented because so far we are still in the containment phase. We are not mitigating the impact of a pandemic and there is no sustained community transmission. But we are working now on sending these messages to the people in different locations and how to manage every case.
Okay, let's just remind you how we got here and if the H1N1 flu virus is as scary as it sounds. Last month, the WHO raised the pandemic alert level from phase 5 to phase 6. But what does that mean? Well, the lead up to a pandemic has been divided in 6 stages. Phase 1 is when a particular virus circulates among animals. Phase 2 is when an animal virus infects a human, causing a potential pandemic threat. Phase 3 is when this virus has caused sporadic cases in humans, but it still hasn't been transmitted between people. Phase 4 is when humans are transmitting the virus to one another. Phase 5 means a pandemic could be imminent as it's spread to 2 countries. Phase 6 would be an official pandemic. It signals the human spread of the virus in at least 2 geographical regions in the world. Ms. McKenzie, why is this important, the official pandemic tag at phase 6 and the fact that it's now been called unstoppable?
Well, the thing is, there are sort of 2 questions in there. The first one is, why do we go to phase 6? Because that is the legal prerequisite that the drug companies need to go ahead and make pandemic vaccine. Otherwise, they have contracts that they say they should be making vaccine for the regular seasonal flu. But if WHO declares a level 6 pandemic, then their contracts say, okay, switch. And that's what the import of that was. And it's very good because it looks very much like the new pandemic virus is beating out and replacing the old flu viruses that everyone got last winter. So we're going to need that new vaccine. So that's a good thing. But why are they saying it's unstoppable? Because flu is. A new flu virus circles the world every year, every winter. First in the northern hemisphere, then in the southern hemisphere. There's a flu season. It spreads from the Far East and just circles the globe. Every now and then you get a completely new virus coming in that nobody has much immunity to. That's when you get what is called a pandemic, because those viruses are more serious. That's what we've got going on now. And yeah, it's unstoppable. It's as unstoppable as the flu ever is.
Mr. Schofield, are pharmaceutical companies prepared for this?
They're as prepared as they can be. The problem is that they, as I say, they have been producing the seasonal flu vaccine, which they're required to do every year. And as soon as they have the strain from the WHO for the coming flu season, they use all their capacity to produce that particular vaccine. The WHO, it was thought that the World Health Organization may at some point order the stopping of seasonal flu vaccine production and replacing it with that for the pandemic. But in the event, they decided to wait until the production of the seasonal vaccine was finished, and then ask companies to start on the pandemic version. And that's what happens. Obviously, it will take a while to scale production up once the vaccine is ready. And there is, in fact, only limited capacity around the world for the production of the pandemic vaccine. But hopefully, depending on the strength of the vaccine, and it could be that the use of new adjuvant technology makes the vaccine more effective at a lower dose. This would mean that the companies would maybe be able to triple or even quadruple their production of vaccine, given that this will be a single vaccine given alongside the seasonal flu vaccine.
Considering the world sees a new virus coming through, a new pandemic, it is said every 30 to 60 years, what are you preparing for next?
As has been mentioned already, it's a very unpredictable virus. We're in an unusual situation at the moment in that we're at the pandemic level for the H1N1 virus, but also we mustn't forget that the avian flu virus H5N1 is at level 3, I believe. And one major worry is that the current new virus will mutate or reassort with the H5N1 or another virus to become even more virulent. But as I say, it's very difficult to predict what happens with the flu viruses. It could remain mild as it is, or it could come back in a very much more virulent form in the coming winter season.
Well, let's look forward to the mild version then. Let's leave it there. Mr. Ian Schofield in Edinburgh. He's a principal analyst at Scrip World Pharmaceutical News in Brussels. Deborah McKenzie, the European correspondent for New Scientist magazine. And in Cairo, Nasser Eldin Tantowi at the World Health Organization. And as always, of course, you viewers, thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Please do get in touch with us with your comments and suggestions. We're very interested in what you have to say. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.